The night I finally understood Sun Tzu, I was sitting alone in my car, engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel like I was bracing for impact. I had just walked out of my own house. No shouting, no slammed doors, just the quiet kind of leaving that hurts worse than noise. The porch light flickered behind me, and for the first time in my 52 years, I realized I had spent most of my life fighting the wrong battles and losing the ones that mattered. Back then, my life looked respectable from the outside. Married for 3 decades, 2 grown sons, a steady job that paid the bills and kept food warm on the table, Sunday dinners, morning routines, familiar arguments that never quite got resolved but never exploded either. I thought endurance was the same thing as wisdom. I believed being loud meant being strong, being right meant winning, and charging forward, no matter the cost, was what men were supposed to do. I didn't know that real strategy is quiet. I didn't know that the most dangerous mistakes are made long before the battle begins. Years earlier, a friend had gifted me a thin, worn book, The Art of War. I'd skimmed it once, chuckled at the irony of ancient war tactics applying to modern life, and left it on a shelf to gather dust. Men like me don't think we need lessons. We think experience is enough. But experience, I've learned, can harden you without ever making you wise. That night in the car, the silence was loud. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven. The smell of old leather and regret hung heavy in the air, and a single line from that forgotten book came back to me, sharp and unforgiving. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. I had never truly known myself, and by the time most men realize that, the cost is already paid. In my younger years, I mistook motion for progress. Every morning I woke before dawn, buttoned my shirt with practiced hands, and stepped into the role I thought I was born to play: provider, problem solver, the man who never hesitates. I carried my confidence like armor, polished on the outside, heavy on the inside. At work, I spoke before listening. At home, I corrected before understanding. I thought leadership meant standing in front, chest out, voice raised just enough to command the room. My wife used to watch me from the kitchen table while I talked, not interrupting, just watching. I remember the clink of her spoon against the mug, the way her eyes softened and then slowly dulled. At the time, I told myself she agreed with me. Now I know she was learning how to live around me. That was the first clue, though I didn't recognize it as one. Sun Tzu wrote that the wise warrior avoids the battle. I laughed when I first read that. Avoidance sounded like fear, but in my life, every argument became a hill to die on. If my son challenged me, I doubled down. If my wife went quiet, I filled the space with explanations she never asked for. The house grew quieter over the years. Not peaceful, just careful. Doors closed softly, conversations stayed shallow. Even laughter felt scheduled, like it had to ask permission. I told myself this was what stability looked like, but stability built on control is just silence waiting to break. The real suspicion crept in slowly, like a draft you don't feel until you notice the window has been open all along. My wife started taking longer walks. My sons stopped asking for advice. They made decisions without me and didn't explain them. I wasn't being shut out, I told myself. I was being respected. That lie was easier to carry than the truth. He who is prudent and lies in wait for an enemy who is not will be victorious, Sun Tzu said. I had never waited. I had never listened, and the battle I thought I was winning was already over. The discovery didn't arrive with shouting or slammed fists. It came quietly, like most truths do when they've been waiting long enough. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because the trash bins were still out, and the air smelled faintly of rain and cut grass. I stepped into the house and felt it immediately, that thin, unsettling stillness that doesn't belong to an ordinary day. The television was off, no footsteps, no voices drifting down the hall. My wife was sitting at the dining table, hands folded, a glass of untouched water in front of her. She didn't look up when I entered. "We need to talk," she said. 3 words: calm, monolithic, steady, the kind of calm that comes after decisions have already been made. She told me she was tired, not of working, not of marriage, but of being unseen, of speaking and watching her words fall to the floor between us, unheard. She said she had been lonely while living beside me, that she had learned to choose peace over honesty because honesty always led to war. I wanted to argue, my chest filled with defenses I had sharpened over years, but something in her eyes stopped me. Not anger, not tears, just clarity. That night, after she went to bed in the guest room, I pulled The Art of War off the shelf. The pages smelled faintly of dust and old paper. I read slower this time. Victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. I had spent decades fighting first, at work, at home, inside myself, believing victory would come eventually. I realized then that I had never prepared for peace. The betrayal wasn't hers, it was mine. I had betrayed my own household by turning love into a battlefield and calling it leadership. And the cruelest part? By the time a man realizes he's been at war with the wrong enemy, the casualties are already counted. I sat there until the house creaked awake around me, listening to the clock tick like a reminder that time does not negotiate. Some lessons, Sun Tzu warned, are learned too late. The hardest battle I ever faced wasn't with another man, it was with my own pride. The next morning, I watched my wife make coffee the way she always had. Measured, quiet, careful not to spill. I noticed things I'd ignored for years, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she exhaled before turning around, as if bracing herself for impact that never came. I wanted to apologize. The words lined up in my throat, sharp and clumsy. But Sun Tzu's voice, steady and ancient, echoed in my mind. Know yourself, and you will win all battles. I didn't know myself yet, not well enough to speak without turning confession into defense. Instead, I chose a different action, a smaller one. I listened. When she spoke, I didn't interrupt. When she paused, I didn't rush to fill the space. Silence, I learned, is not emptiness, it's room for truth to enter. She told me how I corrected her stories in front of others, how my advice always arrived before her feelings were acknowledged, how love to her had begun to feel like a performance review. There was no villain in her words, just exhaustion. I spent weeks unlearning what I thought strength looked like. At work, I stopped pushing every meeting toward my own conclusions. At home, I asked questions I didn't already have answers for. My sons noticed first. One of them said, almost surprised, "You're different lately." Sun Tzu wrote that supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. I finally understood. My enemy had never been my wife's silence or my children's distance. It was my need to dominate moments that asked to be shared. The battle shifted, not outward, but inward. And for the first time in my life, retreat didn't feel like loss. It felt like wisdom arriving quietly. But change, I learned, doesn't erase consequences. Some truths still had to face the light. And not all wars end privately. Change tests you in public. I learned that the afternoon my oldest son came over unannounced. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, scanning the room like he was trying to decide where to place his words.
The house smelled of lemon cleaner and old memories. "Mom says you're trying," he said carefully. Trying. Not changed, not forgiven, just trying. He told me things I had never allowed him to say before, how he learned early that disagreement meant distance, how he modeled my behavior in his own relationships and paid for it, how he was afraid of becoming me before he understood me. That one landed deep. Sun Tzu warned that the greatest victory is that which requires no battle, but some reckonings must be witnessed to matter. Word traveled, quietly but honestly. My wife told her sister the truth, not the angry version, the accurate one. At church, conversations shifted. People didn't avoid me, but they watched, observed, measuring consistency over apologies. I didn't defend myself. That was the action. I showed up differently. I asked my wife's opinion in front of others and meant it. I let my sons disagree without correcting them. I learned to lose small arguments to win back trust. The consequences weren't cruel, they were fair. Respect, once spent, must be earned again in installments. Sun Tzu said, "Opportunities multiply as they are seized." For the first time, I saw opportunity not as conquest, but as repair. Some men wait for public redemption, applause, validation. I learned that dignity is quieter than that. It's consistency when no one is watching. It's choosing restraint when ego begs to be fed. And it's accepting that wisdom, when it arrives late, still asks for humility as payment. I wasn't being punished, I was being tested. And slowly, through changed mornings, calmer evenings, and conversations that didn't feel like contests, I began to pass.
Peace doesn't announce itself. It settles in slowly, like dust after a long road. Months passed, not dramatic months, ordinary ones. Groceries, laundry, shared meals where the clink of forks felt less tense. My wife began sitting across from me again, instead of at the far end of the table. Sometimes our knees touched, accidental and brief, but neither of us pulled away. Sun Tzu wrote, "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity." I used to think chaos meant noise. I know now it can also mean silence stretched too thin. The real consequence wasn't divorce papers or public shame. It was realizing how close I had come to losing a life that still looked intact on the surface. That kind of loss doesn't leave rubble. It leaves ghosts of conversations that never happened, of tenderness postponed too long. One evening, my wife handed me the old book, the same one I'd ignored for years. She'd underlined a passage. "He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight." She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That was the moment I understood the lesson most men learn too late. Life is not a battlefield to be conquered. It's a relationship to be maintained. I stopped measuring my worth by how often I won. I started measuring it by how safe the people I loved felt around me. My sons came back more often. Conversations grew longer. Laughter returned, not forced, not scheduled. I didn't become a different man. I became a quieter one. And quiet, I learned, is where wisdom likes to live. Some lessons cost marriages. Some cost children. Some cost years you never get back. I was lucky, but luck had nothing to do with it. It was surrender, chosen before total defeat. If you're listening to this and thinking of all the battles you've already fought, I understand. Most men are taught how to stand their ground long before they're taught how to stand still. We learn how to win arguments before we learn how to protect relationships. And by the time wisdom knocks, pride has already answered the door too many times. So I'll leave you with this. What if the strength you're chasing isn't in winning, but in knowing when to stop fighting? Would you have recognized the lesson sooner than I did? Tell me in the comments. And if this story spoke to you, stay with us, subscribe, and walk a little slower with me next time.